Larry Johnson. Who better to ask about what's really going on in the Capitol, in the White House, and above all, in the war than Larry Johnson. Larry, welcome, as always, to the show. Before we go to the war directly, though I believe indirectly, my question does relate to the war. How long can the US public tolerate being led by men, not so much because of their age? Mick Jagger is 80 and still moving sylph-like, but men whose brains have gone, have melted. Yeah. How long can the US public tolerate this?
You know, George, you and I have seen this before. This was the sclerotic last days of the Soviet Union when you had Gromyko and Brezhnev, you know, these empty shells of old men who had fought valiantly in World War II, but they were used up. America has become what the Soviet Union was on so many aspects, both the persecution of political prisoners, suppression of free speech, and being led by a bunch of doddering idiots.
Yeah, it must be time for new people, Larry. Surely everyone can see that, including their own parties.
Yeah, the state of politics in the United States right now is broken. The dysfunction is so great. The Democrat Party used to be considered a party of the working class, of the blue-collar folks, but they have abandoned the blue-collar folks. And similarly, the Republicans, who always had a reputation for being with the country club crowd, those who were members of exclusive clubs, they still sort of retain that. And then you have Donald Trump as a populist attracting a broad base of support of the former, working class blue-collar types. And they are shunned and feared. So it is, what you would hope would be like a normal market activity. It's not. The process is rigged. It is controlled and structured in such a way that it makes it very difficult for anyone to clear the threshold. And that's why I'm not a rabid Trump supporter by any measure, but this is why they're trying to destroy Trump, because he's so outside the box of the traditional political parties, both Republican and Democrat.
Yeah, I mean, both Trump and Kennedy have every reason to want now to smash that box. And the question is, Can the box afford to allow either, or maybe even both of them, to win?
Oh, no. I mean, that's at some point, what's going on here in the United States is going to come crashing down. We cannot continue to maintain this facade of a house of cards pretending that it's a house of stone. Just look at what is happening to government spending. It's into the trillions of dollars. In the past, we got away with that because we could borrow money from the rest of the world. But now we've managed to alienate the majority of the population of the world, if you count it in terms of China, India, Russia, Malaysia, Indonesia. All of a sudden, the United States is facing the possibility of being isolated itself. Its international rules-based order is coming unglued. It is no longer going to be able to call the shots and bully other countries as it has over the last 50 years.
Absolutely. Now let's turn directly to the war, Larry, where your great expertise will be valuable. Every time I look at the war map now, it's not the Ukraine that's advancing, it's the Russian forces that are breaking through lines, sometimes 5 and 7 kilometers in a matter of days. It's not yet a rout, but it's beginning to look like an accelerating period of substantial advance by the Russians. Has that dawned on the security and intelligence establishment in Washington yet? And if so, what are they going to do about it?
Yeah, not yet. In fact, you've seen sort of a coordinated messaging. You had Joe Biden, who's demented, Anthony Blinken, who's not, both saying the same thing the other day, that Russia has lost. And that was echoed by one of your own countrymen, Sir Lawrence Friedman, who wrote an article stipulating that Russia has lost and Putin has lost. And I look at all three gentlemen and say they need to go back to school and learn what the meaning of the word "lost" is, because Russia is not losing in terms of casualties. It's not losing in terms of its ability to produce weapon systems, just the opposite. It's outproducing NATO itself, outproducing the United States. It's not languishing in terms of forging new relationships with countries that are outside the sphere of U.S. control, particularly a de facto military and economic alliance with China. So, but by whatever definition or measure of losing you want to come up with, the only ones losing are not only Ukraine, but Sir Lawrence let it slip at the end of his article. What terrifies him, and what has most of the West terrified in terms of the political leadership, is that when Russia wins this, not if, when Russia wins this, it will represent an existential threat to NATO. NATO will probably not continue to exist as we know it.
Now, do you have a view on the thesis I advanced in my monologue, and I reprise it in case you didn't hear it, that the war will now move south, as it were, that the advance in the Donbass is now certain, right up to the Dnipro, and that might well be the demarcation line, the parallel, to use a Korean parallel. And the only thing that remains, perhaps not the only thing, but one thing that remains of importance to Russia is to liberate, as they would put it, Odessa, and take the coastline and render the stump state of Western Ukraine landlocked and make the Black Sea a Russian sea. It seems to me militarily there's an ineluctable logic about that. What do you think?
Right. No, I agree with you. If in the aftermath of the termination of the grain deal, Russia has now effectively embargoed that port. It has bombed it, has made it impossible for normal shipping activity to go on there. And when this war ends, Russia will be in control of all territory in Ukraine that is to the immediate east of the Dnieper, and it will be in control and retake Odessa, and that I don't see it. It's not going to go. Putin and his generals are not going to negotiate away Odessa because it's so integral to Russian history, and not just during Soviet times, predating Soviet times. It is what we have seen, though, is Russia is not tipping off its plans, in stark contrast to Ukraine and NATO, who kept saying, boy, there's going to be a grand counteroffensive coming. It's coming soon. It's maybe in June. They kept announcing it in advance. Who does that? Russia doesn't announce anything in advance. It just moves and it acts.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like the hard man that's always publicly you. If he was that hard, he'd just come up and do it, not publicly mouth off about it all the time. And of course, on the principle that the boy who cried wolf, there's only so many times, or to mix the metaphor, as Mrs. Thatcher once said, as I don't often say, you can't make a souffle rise twice. And to call it a spring counteroffensive, a summer counteroffensive. Oh no, wait, the real counteroffensive is about to start. You begin to look ridiculous. The West is looking ridiculous in this.
Well, it's akin to a failed Hollywood strategy. You know how Hollywood does it in the winter and early spring. They're announcing the blockbusters that are going to come out, and it's going to be just the biggest event of the summer. And then more often than not, when the movie shows up, nobody goes because it's a bomb. And that's exactly what has happened with Ukraine. Only in this time, we're not talking about entertainment and something as trivial as a movie. We're talking about the lives of tens of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers. The equipment that was supplied by Britain, by France, by Germany, by the United States is being chewed up as if an iron-eating monster was consuming it, just with a ravaging appetite, taking it all in and scattering it about the fields of Ukraine. And they have no answer. And what their only answer is, they continue to throw men up against these Russian lines that are well entrenched, well defended, and they're paying a terrible price. It's really catastrophic. The losses of human beings, Ukrainian human beings in this case, and the immoral West, frankly, is enabling this. They're allowing this to go forward because their entire plan consisted of banking on Ukraine as the wedge that they would be able to drive into Russia and cause Russia to split apart.
Larry, they're running out of Ukrainians, though. No? I mean, they've already drafted 16-year-olds to 60-year-olds. They're drafting people with physical and even mental disabilities. I saw some video of one unfortunate man with clearly mental abilities being drafted. They are literally pouncing on people who thought they were in a reserved occupation and dragging them off. The richest Ukrainians are to be found, I can assure you, driving the most expensive cars around some of the most shishi parts of Europe, far from the front. They're running out of Ukrainians to feed into the mincing machine.
Oh, yeah, no, you're absolutely right. This is, I don't know if you ever recall a movie with Michael Keaton. It was called Multiplicity, but it's premised on the notion that they took some of his DNA, reproduced him. But with each generation of reproduction, the quality of the individual deteriorated. It became less, not better, until by the third iteration, it was severely mentally handicapped. Well, that's what's happening to the Ukrainian army. The army that stood intact in February of 2022 is gone. And what was important about February 2022, even though Ukraine was not a member of NATO, it represented the second largest army in NATO as a de facto member. After the United States is number one, Ukraine was number two in terms of troop size, Turkey number three. If you put the armies of the United States, Turkey, and Ukraine together, that represents easily 80 to 85% of the manpower of all of NATO, which puts all of this into context. And so now what's happened is, with the deaths of the original senior generals, senior officers, colonels, and followed by the deaths of the senior non-commissioned officers, they're being replaced by younger, more inexperienced people at each go-round. They've now this offense represents the third iteration of these troops. And so now they're going to have to rebuild a fourth army. They don't have the time. They don't have the manpower. They don't have the secure places to do the training. They are in a death spiral. And it is time for the world to come to grips with that, because once Ukraine collapses, I think the collapse of NATO is the likely next step.
Finally, Larry, and I'm grateful for your time, I'd be the last person to hold a candle for the CIA or for MI6. And sure. I've been opposed to both of them all of my life, and they to me, if they had ever heard of me. The one thing I never thought about either of them was that they were dumb. I assumed that clever people like you were in these agencies. Yeah. If that is so, or ever was so, what do they think about? I mean, because presumably they do not, I mean, although they feed lies to the public, I work on the assumption they don't feed lies to their own government. They must be in possession of the kind of intelligence that you have, the kind of publicly available intelligence that sensible people have already grasped. So what is it that they are telling their government, and what do they think of their government, apparently completely ignoring what they are being told?
Well, are you familiar with the cartoon Dilbert? It is
Yes.
it is about a chubby bureaucrat who always is getting into trouble. Unfortunately, most people harbor the image of either the CIA or MI6 as Pierce Brosnan or Sean Connery, but really it's Dilbert. And what it is it's a bureaucracy that sends the kinds of incentives that people will do stupid things. Something as simple as when the Israeli embassy was bombed in 1992 in Argentina, it was believed that Hezbollah was involved with it. Now, you would think if the CIA was smart, they would have said, hey, let's start collecting to find out what we can about Hezbollah, whether they were involved with this. I was down at the embassy speaking with the CIA chief of station, and I asked him what they were doing to collect. And he says, well, it's not on our collection plan. This is a plan the bureaucracy puts out a year in advance. And because it wasn't on his collection plan, he wasn't going to collect on it. So my word to you is that attitude, that kind of obtuseness remains within the CIA. It's gotten worse over the years. Right now, any smart CIA officer that tried to write an analytical piece pointing out that there is no way Ukraine can win this, and that Russia is not going to allow any other outcome than a Russian victory, that analyst would be run out of the building because the bureaucracy does not want to hear that. So it's become its own sort of choir. It sings to itself, preaches to itself, and without actually being forced to come to grips with reality.